In the corners of Judah, where dust rises easily and the wind tells ancient secrets, there was a village so small that many did not even remember its name. Moresheth Gate. It was the kind of place where life passed slowly, where the sun beat down on the crops and the sound of herds mingled with the singing of workers. And it was there, in that simple and forgotten setting, that Micah was born. There was no announcement from angels, no star in the sky, just an ordinary child in an ordinary place. But from an early age, Micah seemed to see the world differently. While the other boys played carefree, he watched. He watched too much. His silence was not shyness. It was as if he heard something no one else could hear. The adults talked about high taxes, corrupt judges, hunger. He listened, and it stayed inside him, burning slowly. Subscribe to the channel for more exciting Bible stories and turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos. If this content touches your heart and you want to support us, feel free to click on the "Thanks a lot" button. All help is welcome and makes a big difference. The boy grew up with a restless heart. Every injustice he witnessed was like a stone in his shoe. He knew something was wrong, but he didn't know what to do about it. Until, at some point, no one knows when or how, Micah felt it. It wasn't a bolt of lightning or a voice from heaven. It was more like a weight on his chest, a call he couldn't ignore. He understood that what he saw and what he felt was not just his. It was God showing him what was hidden from everyone else. The rich exploiting the poor, the leaders bending, the laws, the prophets selling blessings. All of this was killing the hearts of the people. And someone needed to speak up. Someone needed to stand up. And that's when Micah, still young, took the first step. Not with shouting or fame, but with a truth in his throat that he could no longer keep silent. And the city wasn't ready. Because what he was going to say was too powerful to be ignored and too dangerous to be accepted. It was on a muggy dawn, when the silence seemed heavier than usual, that Micah woke up in a cold sweat. It wasn't a fever, nor a bad dream. It was something else. A restlessness that came from within, as if someone had called his name, but not with a human voice. It was like an echo in his soul. He got up, left the house without saying a word, and stood on top of a hill, looking down at the city below. The lights in the houses were still on, laughter, music, parties. From the outside, everything seemed fine, but Micah knew what was hidden behind those walls: bribery, lies, families going hungry while their leaders lived like kings. The smell of injustice filled the air, but no one else could smell it. Only he could. At that moment he understood. It wasn't just indignation, it was a calling. God hadn't made him see all this for nothing. What he carried wasn't an opinion. It was a message, harsh, heavy, uncomfortable, but true. When he came down from that hill, Micah was no longer just an observer. He was a prophet, but unlike the others the people were used to. He didn't wear fancy clothes. He didn't talk about victories or riches to come. Micah spoke with the hoarse voice of reality, and that sent shivers down people's spines. The people were surprised. The priests turned up their noses. Who was this man from the countryside to meddle in city affairs? But he did not back down. He spoke in the markets, in the squares, at the temple doors. He denounced the theft hidden in the laws, the leaders who pretended to be holy while exploiting widows and orphans. Some listened. Many laughed, others were angry, but no one could ignore him, because Micah spoke as if he had fire in his mouth, and that fire began to spread, burning the masks of Jerusalem, until one day he pointed straight to the heart of the city, and then scandal was inevitable. Micah was not the type to impress at first glance. He did not wear expensive robes, nor did he have a crowd around him. He walked with dusty feet and an unshaven beard. He spoke simply, directly, without embellishment. But when he opened his mouth, silence fell like a stone. It was impossible to ignore. Unlike the famous prophets of the time, who walked the corridors of the palace, Micah was from the countryside. He grew up planting, harvesting, living with suffering people. He knew firsthand what it was like to pay dearly for bread, to see his children go hungry while the rich feasted. That's why his words were so full of truth. He didn't speak from Evar, he spoke as one who had lived. And the most curious thing, he was not afraid of anyone, not even the king or the priests. He pointed his finger without trembling. He said that the rulers were selling the country for silver, that the judges twisted justice as if it were an old rag, and the prophets, who were supposed to guide the people, were more concerned with receiving gifts than listening to God. While the leaders played with pretty words, Micah cut deep. He called things by their name. He called sin, sin, injustice, injustice. He didn't mince words. This, of course, caused discomfort. Some tried to silence him. Others called him crazy. But the more they tried to silence him, the louder his voice grew. He didn't want fame or glory. All he wanted was for the people to see that religion without justice was just a facade, that the city was beautiful on the outside but rotten on the inside. And the more he spoke, the more the tension grew, until one day Micah looked up at the temple and, without blinking, uttered a prophecy that made the ground shake. It was one of those days when the sun seemed hotter than it should have been. The streets of Jerusalem were bustling with people, merchants were shouting, children were running, and the temple, towering above, shone as if nothing could touch it. The city was full of pride. After all, this was the center of faith, the place where God lived. According to what they said, it was in this setting that Micah stopped. He stood facing the temple, his heart racing, his eyes burning. He knew the weight of what he was about to say. He knew that there, where everyone came to seek spiritual security, he was about to drop a bomb that no one expected. He took a deep breath and he spoke. "Zion will be plowed like a field." The words cut through the air like a sharp knife. No one understood at first, but soon the shock set in. Would the temple be destroyed? Would the holy city become just another field? Was that what he was saying? Yes, exactly that. Micah wasn't there to please or comfort. He was warning that God's justice was on its way, that the city's appearance of holiness was just a facade. The sacrifices continued, as did the songs, but behind it all, lies, exploitation, arrogance. God saw, and God wasn't going to stay silent forever. Some began to shout, calling him a heretic. Others shook their heads, saying he was exaggerating. But deep down the people knew. They knew that those words carried weight. They knew that the temple might still be standing, but their faith had been in ruins for a long time. Micah stood still for a while, watching the reactions. He didn't smile or shout. He just turned his back and walked away, leaving the prophecy echoing through the stone corridors. The following days were filled with whispers and dirty looks. The city was still digesting Micah's prophecy. Plowed like a field, it stuck to the walls like dust after rain, but he didn't stop there. On the contrary, it seemed that his courage grew in proportion to the people's attempts to silence him. Micah began to walk the streets with an even more direct tone. He no longer spoke only of the temple. Now he targeted the faces that ruled the city. He called the judges wolves in sheep's clothing, the rulers builders of death, the prophets deceivers for money. He said that they were all selling the truth for crumbs. It was like watching a hurricane sweep through the halls of power. Masks fell, smiles faded. With every word, he stripped away a piece of the veneer that covered the rotten core of the elite. There was no longer any way to pretend that everything was fine, and as if that weren't heavy enough, Micah launched an accusation that seemed impossible to swallow. God was tired of sacrifices, tired of offerings, religious festivals, heartless, rituals repeated over and over again. The people thought they could buy divine favor with incense and song, but Micah tore that illusion apart. "What does the Lord require of you?" he cried. "To do justice, to love mercy, to walk humbly with your God." It was simple, and at the same time, impossible for those who lived trapped in luxury, ego, and power. He wasn't preaching a new religion, he was reminding the people of what had always been at the heart of true faith. Amidst so many harsh words, amidst warnings that felt like punches to the stomach, Micah said something no one expected. In one of his sermons, he paused, looked to the horizon as if seeing beyond time, and said in a firm voice, "And you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, so small among the towns of Judah, from you will come forth the one who is to reign in Israel." Bethlehem. The reaction was almost laughter. Bethlehem was tiny, forgotten, a dot on the map that was only remembered because of David, the former king. But since then, nothing much had come out of there. It was a simple village where sheep outnumbered people. Who would believe that the promised king, the deliverer, would be born right there? But Micah did not back down. He spoke as if he had already seen the scene with his own eyes. He described a different king who would not come with armies but with peace, a leader who would rule with strength and tenderness like a shepherd cares for his flock. And this king would bring security. Not the false security of stone walls or full coffers, but a peace that came directly from God. Some called him a dreamer, others remained silent, suspicious, because there was something in those words that warmed the heart. As if, even amid the predicted destruction, there was still a chance. As if, after the fall, there would be a new beginning. And while people tried to understand how something so big could come from such a small place, Micah continued. His voice now carried a different tone. It was still firm, still harsh at times, but it was wrapped in something that went beyond denunciation. It came with pain, with clamor, with compassion for a people who were about to suffer and did not yet know how much. Micah's voice was no longer just one of denunciation. Little by little, it became the cry of someone who feels everything in their skin. It was no longer possible to say that he was speaking from the outside. It was as if he carried the pain of the people on his shoulders. Every injustice, every forgotten tear, every empty plate, all of it passed through his throat before becoming words. And what came out was not pretty. It was raw. It was real. He spoke of invasions, yes, of destroyed cities, of separated families, of screams in the middle of the night. He spoke in such detail that it seemed he had seen it all before it happened. It was as if he had walked among the rubble even before the walls fell. And as hard as it was to hear, many people began to realize this was not an exaggeration. It was a warning. It was the truth. But the most impressive thing wasn't what he saw as tragic. It was what he saw beyond that. Because in the midst of the smoke, in the midst of the dust, Micah always let a glimmer of hope slip through. Small, almost, invisible, but insistent. He spoke of a people who would return, a broken people, yes, but alive, a remnant, as he called them. People whom God still held in the midst of chaos, and that image of the remnant stuck in the minds of those who heard him. It was like a spark on a moonless night. The idea that even with everything falling apart, there would still be those who would rise up, who had not been forgotten, who would be restored. Micah spoke of this as if he already knew them, as if he could see their faces, their footsteps, their struggle to start over. It was a hope that did not come from the world. It came from God. And that changed the tone of his words, because now, alongside the denunciation, there was another figure walking alongside him. A strange, powerful presence that he described like no one else. God himself approaching to confront and talk. One day Micah spoke as if he were in a courtroom, but this time it was not he who accused. It was God. The scene he described seemed like something out of a drama, only much more real than any play. God stood up like a lawyer, but not to defend, to demand. "Arise and let the hills be the witnesses," said the divine voice. The hills, the mountains, the earth itself would be the witnesses. And the people of Israel there, sitting in the dock. Only the accusation did not come with shouting, it came with pain. "What have I done to you, my people?" Just imagine, the creator of the universe asking questions like that, with his heart on his sleeve, like someone who has been betrayed by someone he loves. Micah painted a picture of a wounded God, but not a vengeful one. A God who asked for explanations, who remembered everything he had done, the exodus from Egypt, the deliverance in the desert, the protection in times of trouble. Everything was there in his memory. But the people had turned their faces away, and even so, God did not destroy everything at once. He asked questions, he gave space, he asked the people to look at themselves. It was a call to repentance, but with compassion. This scene moved those who heard it. It was different from anything else, because it was no longer just about broken laws. It was about a broken relationship, about abandonment. And there, right at that tense moment, Micah made the air even heavier or clearer, depending on who was listening. He showed that it was useless to offer 1,000 sacrifices, rivers of oil, or the firstborn. God didn't want any of that. He wanted a heart that was just, kind, and simple. And when he finished speaking, the people were silent. But Micah was not, because even with all that, he still had something to say. Something that came from deep within, from his heart. A statement so personal that it seemed like a sigh or resistance. Micah no longer spoke as one who denounces from the outside. He now spoke as one who is also part of it. He was no longer just the prophet with his finger pointed. He was a tired man, wounded by the same pains that afflicted the people. His words seemed more intimate, like an outburst. And it was there, in the midst of all that lamentation, that he said something that has been engraved in time. "But as for me, I will wait for the Lord." It was not a cry. It was not an impassioned speech. It was almost a whisper, a choice. Micah knew that things were going to fall apart. He knew that the people would be taken away, that the land would be trampled, that justice would be delayed. But even so, he chose to wait, not for kings, not for political agreements, not for human promises. He would wait on God. "When I fall, I will rise again." It was as if he accepted the fall without losing faith in the return. Darkness was certain, but it was not the end. Micah spoke as one who had walked through deep valleys, as one who knew the taste of God's silence, but also knew that silence was not abandonment. His hope was persistent, almost stubborn. It came with scars, with weariness, but it came steadfastly, and that touched those who heard it, because it was different from those easy promises, from the automatic, "everything will be all right." No, he did not hide his pain. But he also did not give his soul over to despair. And there, in that thread of hope stuck in the middle of chaos, Micah made himself small. Not small in weakness, small in humility. He recognized his faults, his failures, but he didn't let that define the end of the story. There was still a God who forgave. There was still a light saved for the right time. Time passed, as it does, for everyone. The dust of the roads covered Micah's footsteps, and his voice, once so loud in the streets, grew quiet. The Bible does not say how he died. It does not say if he was persecuted until the end, if he lived in peace in his last days, or if he died alone like so many prophets. What we do know is that his message remained. It echoed like a hammer on stone. Years later, much later, when the people had returned from exile, when the old promises began to be remembered like someone trying to piece together a broken vase, someone quoted Micah. Someone remembered that bold statement about Bethlehem. And that's when it all started to make sense again. Bethlehem, that forgotten village, that phrase almost whispered amid so many accusations, it was gaining new life. Because from there, a boy was born. a poor boy without titles, wrapped in simple cloths, lying in a makeshift place, the Messiah. And when the teachers of the law were asked where Christ would be born, they did not quote Isaiah nor Jeremiah. They quoted Micah, the prophet of the field, the one who dared to say that the Savior would come from a place that no one took seriously. Imagine that. A man who lived centuries before, in a time of injustice and darkness, having his words used to point to the beginning of the greatest story of all time. Important people, with scrolls in their hands and authority in their speech, repeating a prophecy from a peasant. Micah's voice crossed generations because it was not built on vanity, but on truth, of pain, of hope, of raw faith. And that's where what is perhaps most important begins. Because when we look at the life of this prophet, so human and so bold, the inevitable question slowly arises. What, after all, does his story have to teach us today? Micah's story was not meant to entertain. It was meant to teach. And even today, centuries later, it continues to do so. Because Micah did not speak only to the people of his time. He spoke to everyone who has ever felt small in the face of injustice, to those who have ever thought of remaining silent in the face of wrongdoing, to those who have ever wanted to give up, but chose to keep waiting. The first thing we learn from him is that courage does not come from position or status, it comes from conviction. Micah was just a man from the countryside with no fame, no wealth, no allies in power. But he had one thing that no one could take away from him, the certainty that he was saying what needed to be said. And that courage is rare, but necessary. The second lesson is about compassion. Even as he denounced, he wept. He was not a cold judge. He was a wounded brother. He felt the pain of the people. He carried the tears of the forgotten. He spoke. Harshly, yes, but because he loved too much to remain silent. And that is where we understand that justice without mercy becomes stone, but mercy without justice becomes an illusion. The third, perhaps the most difficult, is about hope. Micah saw everything fall apart, and yet he said, "I will wait for the Lord." He teaches us that waiting is not sitting idly by. It is standing firm when everything is shaking. It is continuing to believe when everything seems to say otherwise. In the end, Micah was not remembered for the noise he made in his time, but for the seed he planted, a seed that sprouted there in Bethlehem, in a boy who would bring perfect justice, the purest love, and the peace he had dreamed of so much. If you liked Micah's story and want to continue following other stories of faith and overcoming adversity, be sure to like this video and share it with your loved ones. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content. Together, we will explore more powerful lessons from the Bible.